All right, it looks like we're live. Sorry I don't have a fancy intro or anything like that. I am just brand new to the whole YouTube thing. I am working on getting things like thumbnails and appropriate banners and whatnot, but at the moment, I don't have any such thing. But I'm here with Ivan Mike, 1968, I believe it is.
That is unfortunately the channel name, Ivan Mike 1968.
And we're going to talk about role-playing in general. I think we're going to drill down on GNS a bit more. I dare say that you are much more familiar with GNS than I am. I've only just begun my journey. But let's get going. Is there anything that I've said that you've seen that you want to ask questions about, or that you want to approach first? Or why don't you intro yourself? Or why don't you introduce yourself? Why don't we do that?
Who the hell am I?
I need to give you time to introduce yourself. Go for it.
Hey kids, this is Ivan. That's how I always start my channel. That's actually a Phil Lesh reference, and it's way too long to go into that. But yeah, so I've been playing games since like 1981, not continuously. I did take like a lot of people my age. I did take some time off, with kids and family, all that kind of stuff. But I started making YouTube videos in 2011. As a rebuttal to a video by Tetsubo57 about it's a long video, but it was about and that went semi viral within the OSR community, which means it probably got a few hundred views. But so I started making videos on that sort of stuff on the channel, and so that's evolved over time. And I did take some time off the channel as well, but yeah, so that's who I am. I'm nobody really special. I'm just another gamer. Just another person.
You started to respond to me, and I watched your videos, and I found them interesting. And I feel like your responses, paired with some comments that I've received on my own videos, especially from Druden Fuzz, leads me to believe that I'm either not being clear in what my position is, or I'm not being clear in describing what that is.
Gotcha. No, I get it. And like I said, prior to us discussing, or like going live, is the one thing I wanted to be like super, super clear about is like the world is divisive enough.
Yeah.
So the last thing that, we need in the hobby or discussions is to be divisive, and which is really, really, really easy to do.
Yeah.
And, well, we'll get to it later. But I mean, like the people involved in like crafting some of the GNS theory, not the original GDS, but like people like in the Forge, could be denigrating towards particular play styles, or to simulation in general, actually. And I've had commenters on, like, I think a video I made of yours that's very denigrating towards the narrative style, and the big thing I think to keep in mind is that like we're all human beings sitting around a table. Actually, I did talk to Ron Edwards years ago now about the big model, and he said that was like if you read the big model, the outer layer or whatever the hell it is, it's been a long time, is that we are human beings having a social activity, and that's the primary thing that we're dwelling in. So I think it's just if we seek to understand rather than be understood, then often things go much better.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
I agree with that. And, to that point, I think I've maybe not really made clear that I'm not sitting here in judgment of how people choose to engage in an activity. I'm not sitting here and telling you, I'm essentially providing my viewpoint, right? I'm not sitting here just because I understand role play or a role-playing game as a specific thing, and I'm explaining to you, what my thoughts are on that thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to adopt my way of thinking, or that I'm standing in judgment of you or the way that you do things. I'm not going to agree with you if you don't share the view, but it's not something that needs to be vitriolic and angry. It can just be a simple difference of opinion. And to that point, I've thought about this ever since I released the video last week about, emerging what did I call it? My emerging role play model or something like that.
Something
I think
like
I used
that.
the word
Model theory, whatever. Yeah.
Here's the thing. It's not a model because I'm not trying to predict any behaviors, right? Models predict behaviors.
Right.
It's not a theory because I'm not trying to prove a hypothesis, right? So there's nothing scientific about this. What it is a philosophy, right? I have a philosophy on role play, and I think that, and to qualify that, what I'm trying to do is, I'm going to say this shortly, but there's a lot behind it, okay? Right. So what I'm trying to do is tell you how you ought to play, but I'm not telling you how you ought to play based on some unified definition, right? What I'm trying to do is tell you how you ought to play if your goals are X, Y, or Z. So if you come to me and you say, I would really like to be involved in an activity where I get to describe what my character does or what a character does from a 10,000-foot view, and I don't have to speak in first player or first person, and I don't have to describe my own actions in first person, then what I want to be able to do is say, okay, I'm not calling that role-playing. I don't view that as role-playing. But if that's the sort of activity you want to engage in, then we can figure out a way to best support that action with the systems and the setting and the story or the narrative type that you'd like to engage in, right? Like, so in my view, role-playing, and this is going to go back to the video that I made on Troll Babe. So I made a video on Troll Babe, and I said that it's a story game, and I said it right there in the title. And that was kind of contentious. Let me see here what Max says real quick. First of all, hello, Max. We're going to show this. I disagree with the idea that we shouldn't divide the hobby. People engage with the RPG hobby in vastly different manner, and trying to force them all together won't make anyone happy. I don't disagree with that. I think that I am probably, as Arbiter of Worlds is, he's a prescriptive Aristotelian, essentially.
Yeah, no, I watched the video.
And I am sort of in that same camp, right? Like, what he says is that if you try to understand wolf behavior, and I might be getting this backwards, but if you try to understand wolf behavior by studying domesticated dogs and canines, they share some similar qualities. You know, they both have pointed snouts. They both have fur. They both walk on 4 feet. They're both pack hunters, and they survive in a pack. But if you try to understand wolf behavior based on a study of domesticated canines, you're not going to get there.
You're much more likely to get injured accidentally.
Yeah, you're much more likely to get injured accidentally.
I watched that.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. I don't think there's anything wrong with dividing into a sort of a granular format the different styles of play, right?
Right. Which, I mean, let me know when it's okay to jump in. I mean,
no, go ahead. You interrupt me whenever you want. I'm not here to talk your ear off.
That's all right, because I might. So please feel free to interrupt me because I am loquacious. And I agree. I agree with Max as well. I mean, the thing that it's like people aren't gamists or narrativists or simulationists. Games are, like game designs are. Like if you look at that, if you look at that model and what they were trying to do. However, people have intentions, and it's been my experience that regardless of what they were taught, or regardless of who taught them how to play, different people tend to play very differently. And it very often, like, and I'll get back to your point. I don't want to go hard left on you, but
sure, we can go hard left. I mean, I got time.
Right. The big issue very often is, I would love to have this codified lexicon. This is what role playing is. I sent you that video of like what I believe role playing is, which was semi tongue in cheek, but not entirely.
Mm-hmm,
You know, and I don't believe our definitions of role play are very different. They might not be different at all.
No, I don't think they're different at all.
You know,
I've seen your videos on like 40
right.
role play, and
But,
I don't think they're different at all.
The ship has sailed. Like we don't even own. We have to call our tabletop RPGs. Why the hell do we have to do that? The computer ones came later, but you know, Duke Nukem has more bullets than I do, so I'm never going to win.
This
that
is
argument.
absolutely a battle that I fight with my friends regularly.
And you know, if you win and you learn the secret to that, you know, call me, tell me what it is. You have my number, and we can, you know. So the ship has kind of sailed, so we're kind of stuck with these definitions. You know, like we're never going to get that back.
Here's the thing. I agree with that to a point, right? Like up until I'd say several months ago, I would refer to role playing, the hobby,
right,
and I would understand it much differently than I currently understand it. And so I've changed my vocabulary to reflect that change in my understanding. I will say that the onus is on me to define what I mean now, because I no longer mean what most other people mean. Right. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with saying this is what I mean when I talk about role play. So that is the framework under which I'm having this conversation or making this video or whatever. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to change the world. I do think that it's probably an uphill battle because the understanding of what quote unquote role play is now, from the way that I understand it, not.
Right.
And again, I don't say that to like force it upon anyone. It's a philosophy. You can take bits of it that you like. You can take bits of it that you don't like and throw them away. You can take the whole thing. You can ignore the whole thing. Like that's kind of what I'm getting at. But I definitely do understand it as something different than what I used to mean.
Yep.
While I'll agree limitedly that the ship has sailed in that it is a term that is in common use among a group of people that's going to be very, very difficult to get any leverage under. However, I came to a new understanding, and I know there are others who have come to different understandings of role play. Actually, I'm sure you're one of them because we sort of share that common definition of role play. So, I'm not so. I don't need to just leave it lie, right? I don't need to go, well, the ship has sailed and I can't do anything about it, so let me just use the term as everyone else uses it. I don't feel like I have to do that. I understand that point of view, but I think that if there's hope for someone who could have been so close-minded as myself, then there must be hope for others to sort of adapt their understanding and evolve it and really kind of drill down on what role play is.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think probably we're not disagreeing that much. I think the bigger picture, if you will, and it was something that really took me a long time to wrap my head around or finally accept. I think it's probably a better term, is that as my friend Anthony and I talk about a lot, and Eloy and some others, it is very, very difficult to have a conversation about the various facets of role-playing games, and forget the word story, because you find out that you think you and your friends or you and your associates or the person that you're talking about this are talking about the same thing because you're using the same words, and all of a sudden you realize, hopefully sooner rather than later, that they don't mean the same. And what tends to happen is we start to think that the other person is in fact insane or stupid, or they must be lying. I mean, like it's a terrible example, and so it's not the best example in the world. But my girlfriend Susan and she doesn't like fish. I think she's nuts. I mean, she doesn't really like
to eat, or just the animal in general.
No, doesn't like to eat it, and but she likes things. She actually likes like tapioca, and like boba, whatever the hell, those little beads of things.
Sure, yeah.
That's insane. And she likes coconut. That's insane. Now that's a terrible. I mean, it's not the best metaphor or analog or whatever you want to say. But when there's something you actively you're like this. Somebody made a comment on my video, like the idea that like the Forge took things that were not fun, said they were fun, etc., and and then all of a sudden, you know, where am I going with this? I just lost my train of thought because I'm so old, and I thought so something
That's right.
Max said,
Happens to me all the time too.
but I'm convinced that there's no way that somebody could like this. And the commenter essentially, you know, yes, the Forge like absolutely denigrated simulationism. They didn't really believe it was valid. It got very little attention by most of the people in the Forge, to the point where a lot of them later on they will talk about gamism and narrativism and not simulationism at all. Now that's not nice, you know, and that's not helpful. However, the comment, one of the comments I got, where they're talking about, well, you know, they said this thing was fun, this like, you know, intentionally creating drama beforehand. That's not fun. That's not fun for you, dude. But I guarantee you, there are a whole bunch of people out there that's what they want to do. And when they come to a table, they don't want to play through the life of the character. They don't want the world to react. I'm trying to word it realistically.
Yeah.
They don't want to be in the character's head. You know, like for example, Judenfuzz is one of the people that comments on my video, I guess some of your videos sometimes. They'll flat out say, I am not my character. That character is not me. I want to use them like dolls. And I cannot fathom why that might be fun. However, to them, that is precisely what they want to do. And when they role play, that's what role playing is to them, is putting these things in there. We're playing a role of these archetypes or these things, you know. Somebody else, when they role play,
it's a different vocabulary, right?
But it's the same vocabulary.
It's same word, different meaning, right? So it's a different vocabulary that becomes convoluted because these words are being used by different groups in different ways, right? And so I think that there is, I don't know how yet I'm going to present this, right? But first of all, let's start here, right? I said that Troll Babe was a story game, okay?
Right.
Because I identified certain aspects in Troll Babe that lead me to call it a story game. But here's the thing. When you get a book, right? When you get a role-playing game, when you get, I guess we'll just use Dungeons and Dragons because everyone knows what the hell that is. You get, yeah. So Dungeons and Dragons. You get the Dungeons and Dragons book, right? And you read it cover to cover. And you sit down and you implement everything in that book from cover to cover, right? That's not where role-playing is. It's not in the book. Right. The role-playing happens at the table. So the role-playing is how you take what's in the book and then use it to engage in an activity. So those are more tools, right? So when I call Troll Babe a story game, I'm not saying, like, I'm not denigrating story games. And I said this in my video.
Right. No,
there are plenty of story games that are very fun out there to play. I actually really, I liked quite a lot of what was in Troll Babe. Some things are weird, but whatever, you know, take the good with the bad. And, well, not always, but this time. Right. And I really do think that there is a decent amount of interesting material in Troll Babe. But, you know, I don't have to play it as written, right? I can take a story game and I can sit down and I can read through it from start to finish and I can still role play it. I'm just using the tools that I have identified as a story game and using that to role play. So I'm not setting that apart and saying, well, this is a story game, so you can't play this role playing. You can, because role playing isn't in the book. Story isn't in the book. It's something that you do apart from the tools that you're using. And I mean, and then it kind of exists like you brought up with Judenfuzz, and here she is in the comments, and I appreciate her being here. But
this is not news, Judenfuzz. Of course you play for drama. You know this.
But it's, I lost my train of thought just like you did. No, come back. You can, I was saying that you can play a story game as role play. You can role play a story game. I lost it. Dang it.
Well, I'll start talking, and then
Yeah,
all of a
go
sudden
for
I'll
it. Go
say
for it.
something that'll piss you off. You remember what it is.
Okay.
You know, um, the
Oh, I
thing
remember what it
is,
is. I remember
okay,
what
go
it
ahead.
is. I'm so sorry to
I
cut
didn't
you
have
off.
to piss you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, so story games can be very fun. That can be fun to sit around with a group of people and create a story from whole cloth. Like there are games that are better suited toward it than other games. But I won't call that role play. I'm not condemning anyone when I say that that's not role play. There's no modifier. I'm not saying, hey, idiot, you're not role playing. I'm just saying that under my framework and my philosophy of what role play is, it's not role play.
I gotcha. And as a place marker, I think it's laudable that you're like come up with a philosophy and then the idea, well, how do I get this thing that I want? That's good because most people never get there. Most people just play, and sometimes the sessions are good, sometimes the sessions are bad. I'm not sure why. And then as I'd gotten to this point that by banging my head against the wall, unfortunately finding some people I could talk to where things started to make sense. Like, oh no, okay, now I get it. Because before I was like an old man yelling at clouds. Now I'm older. I still yell at clouds occasionally, but um, part of what I came to understand is, my friend Anthony Runeslinger, said one time, I forget how many years ago, he said, the activity, people say that role playing is a conversation. What the hell's a conversation about? He didn't say hell. But he said, I believe that the activity, the primary thing that we do in role playing games is decision making. At first, I disagreed with him quite a bit, or wasn't sure. And he and I disagree about stuff all the time. That's okay. I mean, I'm right, obviously, but but he said, but like I said, yeah, it's about decision making. That's what we do. Like we make decisions all the time as a game master, as a player. What does this bridge collapse or not collapse? Do the bad guys show up now? Why do they show up now? Or my character goes here, my character goes there. I do this, I do that. Why do we make those decisions? Like what's behind it? The Troll Babe. Now I will use like in my heart, I believe that's a story game. In the broader sense of the hobby, I was like, okay, this is a role-playing game that's focused on intentional story creation. And the interesting thing about Troll Babe is like, any system, any game is mechanics plus procedures. A lot of times the procedures are pretty, I think the Forge called it incoherent, where it's telling you could do this, but do that. You look at the old first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, you get some great advice on, and I love the hell out of that guide. Mine is like dirty and like, I've had that thing forever, because
it's been well loved.
Got chocolate stains and everything, whatnot. In some parts, it will tell you to do things for very realistic reasons. Other parts, it's going to tell you to fudge the dice, like flat out, So it's giving you conflicting instructions over and over again in that, and it's not alone. The interesting thing about Troll Babe is the intentional creation of a story or drama, or we're making decisions, to intentionally have something happen, and it's stripped bare of everything. Yes, you can role play the Troll Babes. You can get in the Troll Babe's head and like as Esmeralda or whatever the hell I'm going to name her. I can like give her motivations and idea, and I can role play her quite a bit. But at some point, the game says, okay, you're going to go completely out of character, and you're going to collaboratively make these decisions. You're going to have this narrative railroad, which I just kind of call, the collaborative narrative. But like you're not, the GM isn't doing it. You're all laying down the tracks, and this is where we're going to go to. We'll see how this plays out, but this is the drama. The cool thing about that is when you start to see what that looks like, and you can look at another game where it's completely meant tactically, like everything is laid out. Like we'll say a war game to be like really bare about it or whatnot. Once you see something like that that's stripped of all of its intentions or not intentions, it's without pretense. Like all the interstitial tissue is removed. We're not going to play how did we get to this next scene that we wanted to have. We're saying I want a scene where we have a conflict with this guy. Like we're finally with the, I don't know who the hell's, the blacksmith. We found that the blacksmith is screwing the mayor's wife. I want that scene right there where we confront him. We're not going to play how we get there. Once you see something like that and those set of procedures, like okay, this is how we're going to intentionally create this drama, you start to see that intention in the way other people make decisions when it's a lot more veiled. And you start to notice that, and you start to be able to notice that the people that they say you're playing with, you start to see what they really want from a game. And so you may have the person where you set up everything where we're gonna, here's my set of procedures for like how we can play a game where we're very in character. Your decisions matter. All these sort of things. The world is going to react, in a logical manner. If the dice say I need to roll dice here, the bad guys aren't going to show up because it's a great time for the bad guys to show up. It's just because I knew it's going to take them a week to get here. All this kind of stuff. But you might see one of your players pushing the other way, and you realize, hey, they hate all this stuff. They just want the bad guys to show up because they're there now. It's time for the thing,
Right.
So you start to be able to see those intentions like clearer. And I'll shut up after this one thing. There's an example I gave in a bunch of videos. I mean, I've got a bunch of real life examples, but I'm playing Circle of Hands, another Ron Edwards game, which is not, narrativist. I believe it's very simulationist. I'm playing a circle knight. I'm in this situation where I'm at the top of this mountain. I've come up to pretty much ask the bad guys, the people guarding the pass or whatever, to like give some food to the peasants that are starving at the base of the mountain. Mm-hmm. And guy's being a real jerk.
Keep going. I have to turn my camera and my microphone off just briefly.
No problem.
There's someone's passing behind me.
Gotcha. There's a stained glass window in the room I'm in. I'm in the room with the jerk. I've got a flagon of some kind of liquid. It runs through my head. It would be really awesome, really dramatic, and pretty cool to say, you know what, buddy, screw you, and chuck that flagon through the stained glass window, because now it's on. It's on, right? Yeah. And that'd be a pretty badass scene at that point, mano a mano, you and me, buddy. Now that thought flashes through my head, and I say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because I understood who that character Ingolf was, and he was there to get food for those people, and he knew, even though perhaps that thought went through his head. I'm assuming that at that point he's like, yeah, screw you. Like, I can't do that because that's not going to get those people food, and I'm going to have to eat a little crow here. And so I talked to Ron, the author of the game. I said, well, I made that decision because with the character, I didn't do the dramatic thing that occurred to me because that's not what the character would do. He says, I don't really see there's a difference. You should have thrown the thing through the stained glass, window. If I'd done that, I would have been pushing drama. That would have been a badass scene. I mean, it would have been awesome. I mean, there's times I still regret, man, that would have been really awesome. But it wouldn't have been an authentic in-character experience.
Yeah, it's like scripting a movie. You go where you need to go when the plot says you need to go there, right?
Right.
So it's not like in what is it? Gosh, I forget the movie. Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. In any event, there's a scene in some movie, and they say we should really talk about this at a diner. And then the next scene, boom, they're just in the diner, right? You don't need to watch that. It's not realistic. You don't need to watch them get into their cars and drive to the diner and go through traffic because that would take too much time. You just, boom, go to the diner.
I'm gonna fall asleep.
But that is screenwriting, right? You need to waste as little of the audience's time, which should hopefully be zero in a well-written movie. Heat.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Charlie. You need to, again, in a well-written movie, it should be, you waste the audience's time, not at all. It should be a zero. But in an activity where you are not concerned with just speeding it along to the next conflict or the next emotional payoff or the next, whatever set piece event, that becomes less important. Now, there are sacrifices that you make for that, right? But because it's just nature of the beast. In order to, and in my very first video, when I said role-playing is not storytelling, I equated role-playing, if you gotta pick a genre, I equate role-playing to literary fiction as opposed to genre fiction, right? Genre fiction, usually, I'll say probably 95% of the time, adheres to some sort of narrative structure depending on the genre. There are all kinds of different structures that you can go and view if you're going to write a horror movie, if you're going to write a tragedy, if you're going to write a hero's journey, if you're going to write, you know what I mean, like fairy tales. There are like over 100 different types of structures for different fairy tales that you could tell. And literary fiction is less structured because it's more character focused.
Right.
And so I really think that role play should be viewed in those terms. And, you know, as a result, literary fiction is just, it's kind of a story as someone just living their life, right? It's characters just living their life, and things don't necessarily happen in any particular type of order to move the story forward. They happen to someone, and then it's really how they react to it.
Right.
That provides the hallmark of that genre. And I prefer to think of role playing, if you have to put it in the context of writing, it's going to be more literary fiction, which means, you know, you're going to be in the market sometimes looking to haggle for something. If you want to role play that, if you don't, you know, some people think that it's not a worthwhile endeavor. You just get your stuff and move on. That's okay.
Yeah. I mean, you know, time compression is a whole rabbit hole I don't want to go down, but there's, you can still have time compression and say, okay, does anybody else want to do anything? And now, okay, it's the next day.
Yeah, no, there are certain reasons to, like, you know, fast travel or do some sort of time compression. I'm not arguing.
That's different than let's get to the next interesting scene.
Exactly. Which you know, which Troll Babe definitely does, just to keep it in the context of something that's immediately, you know, present in my mind that I can speak to. Troll Babe absolutely does that. And, you know, it sort of has all the hallmarks of a story game, right? I mean, yeah, well, it's essentially, its essence is a story game. Again, that doesn't mean you can't role play it.
Right. And I believe that's very intentional. Like, this is, okay, let's remove all this other crap. I can say this and I'm going to go back up. The truth of the matter, I believe, or my opinion, is that, like, what Troll Babe's doing is, like, let's stop pretending that's not what we're doing. And let's move it on. The truth is, people make decisions like that all the time, and the game master puts you in that next interesting. Here's the interesting thing that happens next, you know. But we don't necessarily talk about it. So here's my theory, my hypothesis. I got a hypothesis. My hypothesis is that if we look at the GNS model or big model or thing, you tend to appreciate the simulationist approach. Let's say that's I'll put that down as a axiom. Is that the right word? Or hypothesis?
Sure.
So let's say that there's a couple ways you can divide up the hobby. There's a lot of ways you can divide up the hobby, but let's just say there's a big divide, which is probably like story as product versus story as byproduct. You know, playing to find out what happens versus playing to create, which is kind of like the play to find out thing is I forget if it might have been Vincent Baker that said it first. And I think the idea like that came out from the Forge is like, we're playing to find out. I believe what they really meant was play to create, but they didn't want the game master to create something. Let's just, you know, the game master already knows what's going to happen anyway. We're going to meet the big bad evil guy. In this like a story as product kind of mindset or intention, we're all pushing that way. Maybe or maybe it's the game master, but like let's play to create. Let's play to create what happens. Let's play Troll Babe, you know. Versus completely playing to find out. We have no clue what the hell's going to happen. I'm going to role play Terrence McSweeney in Call of Cthulhu, and Anthony's Call of Cthulhu game. He's going to role play the world the way the world would actually work. You know, he's going to role play the NPCs like they would really act and interact and react to my character and vice versa. And so we're not really sure what the hell's going to happen. We're not pushing towards anything. And so, like, if you look at it that way, like both gamist philosophies or intentions and simulationist intentions end up on the story as byproduct. They don't give a rat's ass, if you will, about like creating the story or pushing towards anything. You know, the guy that's really into like, you know, game. Can we just get to the part where we like have the fight with the orcs? I want to have the fight with them, and dude, I invested all this stuff in my character. He's badass. I've got 18 00 strength. You know, let's do this thing. Plus 5 only Avenger. You know, I'm not saying anything bad about that, but they don't care about your story. Whatever. Yeah, it's window dressing. Okay, let's move. Or they don't want to necessarily push towards a story. But you can divide up the hobby in a different way, which is where it gets interesting, where you're making decisions for in-character decisions versus out-of-character decisions. And in that case, all of a sudden, like, gamism and and narrativism, they end up on one side. You're making decisions for out of character reasons. I am doing the thing that's strategic. Or here's a challenge. I remember I was playing Pathfinder with some friends when I started playing role playing, again, and I'm playing a character that's kind of like woodsy-ish. I kind of develop, and a bunch of alligators attack us, or we're, and I'm like, man, I really don't want to attack the alligators. Let's go. And the guys got pissed. Like, dude, it's a fight. It doesn't matter whether they're alligators or trolls. It's a fight. And there was this big mismatch of intentions. They were making these decisions for out of character reasons. So that, and they didn't want me to not do that either. If you're pushing towards story, if you're playing Troll Babe, you are making a lot of decisions completely out of character. It's not what Esmeralda wants. It's like, what does Ivan and what do Ivan and Bacon and Drudenfuzz think would be a badass scene to have with these Troll Babes?
What would be the most interesting outcome for this particular conflict or convergence of characters?
And that's being very naked about it, and upfront about it. But it could be just as well as be me saying, I'm throwing this flag through the window because that'll be badass. It'll be just like, screw you, buddy. That'll be a cool scene. And when I found that when I was making decisions for out of character reasons because it was tactical, or my friends wanted me to do that because it was tactical, and they got ticked off, that didn't feel authentic, or that's not. I was like, this session's really not doing it for me. When I was making decisions for to push the story forward in any way, shape, or form, it just didn't feel authentic. So it didn't feel authentic if I was doing anything to push the story forward. It didn't feel authentic if I was doing anything out of character. And the same as a GM. I've certainly made my share of GM decisions where, I thought it'd be really cool to have something happen so the players' decisions didn't matter as much. There was a quantum ogre of some kind, And I was like, man, I really shouldn't have done that. That didn't feel very authentic, And so I started to realize that, like, I prefer to play games that way. If you look at the advice on the internet, and if you look at the advice in books, in game books, on the internet, the lion's share of it is telling you to do things for strategic reasons or for story reasons. It's humongous. So if you're coming from the opposite perspective,
I just find that I find it. See, and this is why I think, in my view, GNS is just not applicable. It's because no one tells you to do things for the role play reason, right? I think I pretty sufficiently.
Well, you did. And the video you had me talk about, if you watch Anthony's simulation series, he's not telling you to do this for the role play reason, but he's saying, well, if you do these things, how does this feel?
Well, look, I think there's and I don't necessarily disagree with that, right?
Right.
But you have to be role play first, because the role play, or maybe it's even like experience first, right? Like, you're going to role play. That's the activity that you're going to engage in. The reason that you're going to engage in the activity of role play is to produce a particular experience, right? And then in order to produce that experience, you need to support the role play with I'm not going to use those same words as GNS. I'm going to say, I'm going to say system, I'm going to say setting, and I'm going to say drama. So you need to support the type of role play to achieve the agreed upon experience through those things. And the players are the plot. So whatever they're doing is the plot, period, full stop. And I don't think that there is, in my framework, there's no getting away from that, because I want to focus on the role play. I want to focus on how we can aid the role play in achieving the experience that we want. And I think that depending on the experience, your 3 components, if it ends up being 3 by the time I'm done thinking about this, drama and the system and the setting, are going to look much different, right? Like, there are going to be some times where the experience that you want is going to dictate that simulation be high, right? Or that your setting be to such a degree that that's what's going to support the role play in achieving the experience that you want. And there are going to be times where having a higher drama is going to support the role play to achieve the experience you want. And it's not, I mean, it's a very mutable thing because it really is all dependent on the experience that you're trying to drive at. Okay. However, that can degrade the role play itself, right? If you are too heavily into simulation, if you are constantly being yanked out of the headspace of the character to check a table or to make a roll, you're going to damage the role play experience. And so it will likely add to, and then, you know, so on top of this, I'm going to add a sort of a sliding scale, right? And it's going to be on one end, immersion, which is going to be the role play end. And on the other end, it's going to be metagaming. And so you are going to add the system and the game, or the setting and the drama in varying degrees. Like you're building a recipe to achieve the experience you want. And the experience you want may not end up being role play, right? If what you want to do is lean heavily on drama and you want to lean heavily on game, like is done in Troll Babe, right? And he is very clear about the type of experience he is trying to craft in that book. What the end product ends up being is a tool set that is not best suited for role play. It's best suited for storytelling, collaborative storytelling. That doesn't mean that you can't take what he's given you and also role play, because again, that's not something that will be contained in a book. It's something that happens at the table and how you decide to use those tools. But from a design perspective, because that's where we started from, if your goal is a particular experience, if it's a simulation experience, then you're going to add things that are likely going to pull away from that role play experience. Well, which, you know, which means I'm not going to call it role play, but that doesn't mean anything, right? Like we're not fighting a war. It's not super serious. I'm just not going to call it role play.
Right, I gotcha. And I mean, it's helpful. I mean, you know, to recall that like simulationism, like, as defined by like the originally a threefold model, doesn't mean simulating all this crap and looking at stuff at tables. It's like, I think the right to dream was a better moniker that the Forge ended up using, even though they didn't think it was legitimate. Is like I want to play. I want to be. What is it like to be Ingolf in this world, in this, you know, Iron Age world? And what the system is, like how abstract the system is, has nothing really to do with simulationism in terms of the in-character as character experience, because that's really the heart of that. They even call the stance the possessor stance, kind of in a kind of denigrating fashion. Like they really didn't believe that people could do that, or that would be fun, or that people were capable of doing that, or wherever it was. So that, you know, it was less legitimate play. Whereas you and I would probably be like, no, dude, that's what we're after.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it's kind of,
so it's
okay, like, I mean,
I'm not defending the model. I'm just saying.
No, I get it. I know you're not defending the model. I'm not saying that you're defending the model. Real quick to get to this comment, and yet many players play for simulation and find role play secondary. I get that, and that's totally fine, and they can do that. I'm just not going to call what they're doing role play, and I don't think that that's really. I don't think that that's contentious. Right? Like I can call it whatever I want. I'm not telling anyone else to call it that. But if anyone has questions, if anyone asks, if anyone wants to probe and find out why I'm talking about it in the way that I'm talking about, I'm happy to give them answers. And then, you know, just like me, maybe their perspective shifts, maybe their vocabulary shifts a little bit. But I just wanted to address that comment real quick, which I do. Thank you. Your seat at the table. I
believe that's my friend Rick, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, well, hello, Rick.
No, I hear what you're saying. Like I don't get it, and you know, I don't disagree. You know, it's just one of those things where, you know, like the terms are kind of lost to us, and you know, it is what it is. But I understand what you're saying. Like you start to, it's what is helpful, I believe, is you start to identify, well, what experience do I want, and I think one of the things I will disagree with people on is I believe that like slavish adherence to a set of procedures is not the goal. The goal is I want to feel like I'm this character in this world. The set of procedures that get me there may be slightly different than the set of procedures that get you there. and this may just depend on I think maybe CGA maybe came up with this first, or maybe Anthony uses it a lot. The switching costs, like for some people, for me, like to like roll the dice for a second and then not a bit high switching costs. I surface for a second, roll the dice. Okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. Okay, great. Now back into the mindset of Terrence McSweeney. You know, for other people, they'd rather use signal words, not really say roll sanity or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know? They'd rather, and that's a higher switching cost for, I'm trying to think of making all these kind of decisions. You know, when we're taking our attention away from that immersion in character, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Different people find different things annoying. Like, for example, you might have groups that say, okay, we'll always speak in character all the time. Does it, for them, it might be incredibly disruptive if somebody speaks out of character, or asks a question out of character. For me, it's like, I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, that's what it is. Okay, back down. The set of procedures is not the goal. The goal is, I want to have this experience where I feel like this character, I'm making decisions as this character, and I feel like the world is real and that the decisions I make matter. And if I'm a game master, I want to be making these decisions. I want to view these characters as real. I want to view the NPCs as real because I really like playing NPCs and getting in their head. That would be appropriate for old man, was it Jenkins to do? But like, what would, he's pissed at these guys,
Mm-hmm.
And so he's going to, and also the world is your character. And do you play your character as the world based on what would be dramatic? Or am I playing it like, okay, this is what these people do right now because you just screwed them over, or all right, they're kind of indifferent to you, or whatever. And I hate to use the term play honestly, because then already that's a judgment, but kind of play those things honestly. But the procedures, it's good for each individual person. I think defining what you want without defining it by behaviors, like, game procedures, like what's the end goal that I want?
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult, but I found it was like really, really important to finally get that, and then find out like what things that I do or other people do instantly throw it off kilter, and what things that I do or other people do make that remain the same, And for me, like, there's a whole big rabbit hole you can fall down about making or inserting objects into a scene, as a player. Yeah. And there's objects that should be there. I'm in a bar. There should be, sure. Should be something like that. And there's a line.
Yeah. Is that role playing?
There's a line that gets crossed for every person, and it can be in a different spot. What kind of object do I have to insert? And I'm not talking about a game-breaking one. I'm not talking about something that gives you this huge advantage, or there's a shotgun. My friend Anthony's Runeslinger's example it's called Grimaud's crowbar. It's kind of like a nod to Chekhov's gun. When if there's a gun, you should, you ought to be fired. Right. Yeah. In one of the not the original Three Musketeers book, I think it's the sequel. There's this scene where Grimaud, the lackey of, I think it was Artemis, the door's locked. There's a scuffle going on the other day, and Grimaud spies a crowbar in the hall of the inn and opens the door.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell's a crowbar doing in there? It was, and so like it was one of those things where, like, you say, Dumas, like, probably just, I need a way for him to get in there because he's got to get in there. They've got to find out what's happened on the other side of the door. So I put this crowbar there. It's kind of, our tongue-in-cheek way of saying inserting a crowbar, like Grimaud's crowbar. That's where it goes too far. Like, that crowbar should be down in wherever the hell they receive the boxes.
That's kind of Deus Ex Machina, right? It's like, well, they need a crowbar, so I'll put a crowbar there.
So, exactly. And for me, there's a point that happens faster than it does for other people where I don't want to narrate things about the world because it instantly brings me out of character and it blows it for me.
Yeah, I get that. And speaking of, I'm actually going to go back to this comment real quick here. Yeah. And yet, many players play for the simulation and fun. No, that's not it. This is it here. Role-playing for simulation, as you described, Ivan, doesn't harm role-play as I defined. And that's because we are, as mentioned at the top of the video or top of the stream, we're not using the same definition.
Right.
I would say that the definition that you're using for simulation falls more in line with immersion. And the definition that I use for simulation would be something more like GURPS or Harn World, where there are a ton of tables. And that is, when you ask someone what is a heavy simulation role-playing game, those are typically going to be two of the ones that people answer off the top of their head, especially GURPS. So I think there's a general understanding that those are simulation. I don't think that it's a problem that we're using different definitions. And if you are going to define simulation in that way, then you're going to find more agreement with me for sure. And I can use the word simulation. I mean, that's fine. We're just not using that word the same way, I don't think.
Right. I think that's one of the things. It's one of the drawbacks of like that model and some other things is like the terms kind of suck. Like they could
the terms waste.
They could have used better terms.
Yep, they absolutely could have. They absolutely could have. Which is why. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't mean to talk over you.
No, it's okay. It's why, like, I mean, unfortunately, you need to. I think that's why it tends to get misunderstood a lot, is that the terms just suck, and that they could use much better terms, and we'd be understanding each other a little better. So, I think the point that I was kind of getting at is like there's at the end of the day. It's an easy trap to fall into, which can end up being really divisive, is that when you start saying, well, here's this one prescriptive one way to play, because even if you've got a bunch of people that all like say want what we want, I'm assuming that let's assume that we're on the same page, we start to see that while they may be similar, there's parts of them where, if I'm constantly thinking, oh God, I got to speak in character, or we can never mention this, or we've got to take turns in order, or whatever it is. I'm not being my character anymore. I'm worried man, if I screw up, the GM's not even going to let me have my turn. It's like, screw that, dude. That's not why I'm there. It's like,
right.
I better follow your set of rules. Like, yeah, okay. I shouldn't even make gestures like, but screw you, buddy. I got other friends I can play with. But yeah, and the thing is too, like very often the internal experience that we're having, it's almost impossible to, especially if we're having like an in-character experience. How are you gonna tell me I'm not having one or not having one? Trying to define that on my being like, there are, and Drew and Funtz will yell at me for this, but like for example, there's all kinds of things that will go on in my head, but I'm not sharing them with you. I'm not sharing them with you because I'm already having that experience, and it's a little psychotic. So like, well, Ivan's really not trusting that person. I wonder.
Well, the way that I describe
it
is that it's an individual experience in a group setting, right? Like you're the only one that could possibly see things through the lens of your character's eyes and feel things that your characters would feel, because you're the one that's putting yourself in their headspace. So it's a very individual experience, but it's in a group setting. So if you're stuck in your head and you're not describing what you're doing and where you're going and you're not speaking, then your character's not doing anything. However, there are some things that you're not going to express that you're experiencing in the moment as the character. I think that's perfectly reasonable and actually very conducive to immersion and role play. I think that's a part of the whole, like that's the goal, right? At least in my view.
But you can watch my friends and I, and like we do not all have the same intentions, which is why sometimes our games are a little wonky. It's like, but you can see sometimes I'm playing with people and like I might be less descriptive. I certainly tell you what I'm doing, but I'm not giving you as much description. And some people say, well, you're robbing other people of this experience, of the experience of your character being there. It's like, well, at that point, what is that experience they're looking for? If I'm robbing them this experience, it starts to be a lot more story as product, because now it's time for me to do something interesting and entertain you and all this.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, it's a gray area depending on.
When you say story as product, are you referring to like story after, like how Edwards talks about it, or is it you mean?
Well, story as product, and this is Ivan's definition, falls into two different. It can be expressed at least two different ways. One is the game master has a story, and you're going to play through his story, which was something that the people in Forge hated. They railed against it. That is what I would call story before. That's like you're going to move your guys around like tokens, and you're going to be able to supply some dialogue. But if you're watching any number of channels on YouTube, You can see this is the advice they're giving you. This is how you're going to run this
Yes.
thing. This is how you're going to make sure your
Which
players
I
stay on
disagree.
track.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
all
disagree
this kind of
with
stuff. It's an experience that a lot of people like, but I don't like. Okay. Then there's story now is what the official definition of, say, something like narrativism was as described by the big model. Whereas we right now in the moment are playing Troll Babe, and we're going to make decisions because I want to have something dramatic happen right now. We're making this.
See, that's one of my major issues with how story now is described is that it's not actually story now. It's story before. It's just less time before.
No, trust me. I've had that discussion with my friend saying, well, it could be 2 seconds before.
Right. But that doesn't mean story now.
intention.
Story now to me would be, and let me bring this up here. Because I think it's a good place to bring it up. So Max says, I believe simulation in the sense of GNS is simulating a character acting in a certain way because that's what my character would do. As opposed to gamist, I do X because I want to win, or narrativist, I do X because it makes a cooler story.
Yeah, Max has it. That's
so okay. So if that is the case, if I've misunderstood what simulationism is in the context of GNS, I'm very happy to learn that this is what's being meant. Thank you, Max, for making.
Christ, you should have talked to Max. It would have taken 30 seconds.
I talk to Max all the time.
People could go do something else, but no. But that's essentially that's the bottom line. And it's a better way to think of those things.
So in that regard, I would think that if that's what simulationism is, then I think that denigrating simulation is just not.
It's silly because we're right.
Yeah, it's super just the wrong take. It's just the wrong take.
It's a preference thing, and that's why I started the whole conversation. I would like being divisive is not the way to go, but the thing to find out. I mean, the thing I found out over time is there are, while they might not, the good people, the nice people won't denigrate it. They absolutely will look at that and say, you know what, that's not fun. I don't want to play like that. I don't want to make decisions as if I was the character. That's not why I show up to the table. And they have another intention. And
and to tie it back to what we were talking about with story now, story now would essentially be simulation. So it doesn't even make sense to say that simulation is simulating what your character would do in this situation in the moment. You can't poo-poo that, and then also because that is story now. Story now is what is happening right now in the moment as it's happening. Story before, even if it's 2 seconds before, if that's something like it seems.
I know what you mean. There's probably a better way to describe it.
Probably, but as it's described, appears to be just an incredibly huge disconnect.
That's probably why the better way to say it. And I'm biased because Anthony's my friend and because we talk a lot, is story as product. We are playing to produce a story. So our decisions are being guided by making that story on purpose, whether we've thought of it 2 months before or whether we've thought of it 2 seconds before, where right before Ingolf throws the chalice through the stained glass window, he says, you know what? Ivan says, hell yeah, that'd be cool. I'm going to do that. We're playing to create. Is another way to put it, but it's story as product versus story as byproduct, where we just play our characters. The game master just plays the world, and then when we look back, oh, that's what happened, And it's so the story maybe occurs now in real time, but it's something that like I was referring to. I've heard other people refer to as story after. You see what the story is because you look back and like, okay, like we can recount the events of what happened, and at that point. I don't think the terms matter as much as the idea or being able to recognize why people are making decisions. At that point, like are those decisions being made because this will make a cool story right now, or this will be dramatic, or because this is what's supposed to happen? Because damn it, I wrote this thing, and this is against the Giants, and you guys are going to the next one,
right?
Because versus. Finding out what happened afterwards, and the poor people that just want to are into the tactical play and what might be called gamist. They don't care about making a story now either. It's like, can we get to the part where we do the thing when we're supposed to fight the freak Loth, the Queen of the Demon Wed Pits, for God's sakes. Right. I've been waiting all week to do this thing, and I've got my healing potions and all this other crap. Let's do it, And they don't care what the story is either. They'll find out.
Right.
So that's
let me see. So roll. I do hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. It says emerging story equals story after. Is that essentially what you're getting at, or story?
Yeah.
Okay.
It emerges as a result of the action, the decisions made in play. No, I take that back. It results as occurs as a result of the decisions that we make in character and the decisions that the game master makes in character. Without
it's emergent, right?
Yeah, without out of character reasons for making those decisions.
Right. So later on, you can take the events and structure them in such a way so as to tell a satisfying story. In the moment, you were, I guess, simulating your character.
It might not be satisfying. It might suck.
Well, right. It might suck, but you know, that's litfic, right? Like sometimes the story just sucks. Okay. So that's interesting. And then, you know, Drudenfuzz says story now is not scripted. I would be curious to learn what. Is there any more that you can contribute to that statement, Drudenfuzz? Because as I read it in Trollbabe, and I'm currently in the middle of going through the rest of Ron Edwards' game, not the rest, but the ones that I find might be interesting on their face. The way that it's described in Trollbabe is absolutely scripted. You choose the scene, you choose the conflict, and then there is a little bit of improv that goes on, right? And either the character and the GM say yes and, or the dice say no but. And I hesitate to bring improv into it, but it's the best vocabulary I currently have to express it. So, you know, excuse me.
Join the club, man. It's okay.
Yeah, it's like, you know, there's so many things here that, you know, I can only, it's kind of like, you know, at first, when role-playing first came around, they were calling it, it's like telling a story in a group. And it's like, well, it's not, but they didn't really have the vocabulary to explain it back then. So give me one moment, if you would. I have to turn my camera and my mic off again for 1 second.
So I get to talk? No. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and talk.
While we're waiting for Drudenfuzz to give their answer, the interesting thing is there was a humongous, as I understand it, conflict is the wrong word, but like, you know, the Forge crowd, for example, and I don't speak for them, so, you know, a lot of what they're doing is they're railing against the game master coming with a story, with a scripted story. Now, their story might be scripted prior to play. Your point that like everything is, you know, everything is intentionally being created, or however you said it, like, you know, it's still all story before, because you thought of it 2 seconds before. The story is being scripted at the table, if you will, and part of that was, if you drill really deep, was, damn it, the story isn't just yours. I'm going to write some of it too, and because as a player, so it's not just a GM story. You know, I don't want to sit there and play through your story. I want to write part of the story, and the other guy, I want to write part of the story too. So it's still intentional creation of a story, or a narrative, or creation of dramatic moments, or all, you know, all these kind of things. But it's like, who gets to do it? It's all still story as product, but it's a matter of like, well, who gets to do this? Which is why, like, say, a purist of GNS theory will say, well, no, like a game master coming up with a story beforehand, that's not a narrativism. I would say, yeah, but it still all falls under story as product. It's a matter. The only difference is, well, who gets to write the story? Who gets to make those decisions about the dramatic things that happens? You know, and so it's still all occurs on one side of the divide.
Okay.
You know, I would say, and this, I don't know if I can quantify this, but I would say, if you, and people aren't gamists or narrativists or simulationists or whatever, but the people have preferences of how they like to play. I'm willing
exactly
to
how
bet,
I talk about it.
I'm willing to bet that the people that want to play in character and have a simulation experience are in the minority. And that's probably why you see the lion's share of the advice being given about gaming from here's how you create an interesting thing. Here's when the bad guy should show up. Here's the 5-room dungeon. Or
all the popular channels are Dungeons and Dragons focused, and I call Dungeons and Dragons a combat board game. So, like,
yeah, well, D&D kills the conversation. I love the hell out of some old D&D, and I do play some OSR games, which I think, in my opinion, distill the essence of what that game was for me.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's so many other games out there, dude.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah,
but those are the most popular channels, right? So the fact
right.
that I'm sort of feeding into what you're saying. It's that those people who want the experience that you just described are in the minority, which means I guess there's.
Well, yeah, and you get a lot of advice. You get a lot of GM advice about all these other things. Here's how you have balanced encounters, or here's how you in whatever game, or here's how you make things interesting, or here's how you get Robin's laws or all these things. Here's how you move the action along in this, or Seth Skorkowski, and nothing against him, but like here's how to do this so it's interesting, or here's how to, and very little of what you see is in the public bandwidth is like, okay, I want to have an in-character experience. How the hell do we do that? And one of the negative things I see that can happen from our camp, let's call it our camp for a second,
mm-hmm.
is that by the time some of us like come, we're pissed off. It's like we're in the minority. Not a lot of people are playing that way. We've had unsatisfying experiences where people are making all these other decisions for meta game reasons, let's call it. And we come up with a way that works for us, or we identify behaviors that really push us out of here, and we come up with an idea. Well, here's how you should play. And when it's really just like, I want this experience, this is how I get it. And if you want this experience too, this is the way to get it.
Yeah, that's what ultimately that's the idea. The idea isn't this is how you should play. Let's get into an argument and I'm going to push you into my way of thinking. The idea is this is what role play is under the framework that I define it. Do you agree? Okay, well now we can, engage in a social contract and get together and try to craft that similar experience. Like I'm not interested in shouting matches. I'm not interested in denigrating anyone else's preferred way to play. But what I will say about that is that, again, I'm not prepared to call every style of play role play, and I won't call every style of play role play. And the object isn't to it's to come to a meeting of the minds, right? So this is what role play is to me. This is how I like to experience it. And let's get together and do that, and we'll call it role play. And that's role play, and we will get together with like-minded individuals and we will role play.
And I think actually I really enjoyed your 2 video series on like you're role playing a human, not a dwarf, or
Right.
And well, I thought it was awesome. And trust me, I've been there with the scripted thing, and I thought your scripted thing was fine. The thing you read, and I thought your extemporaneous video afterwards was fine too. I think you're probably much more critical of yourself than somebody else would be. I thought they were both really good. I watched them back to back. Oh, this is good stuff, because it kind of that whole talk, it ushers in like, well, how the hell do I role play? Because it's about, I'm going to say, I'm trying to say this without making the spectrum of good to bad to good, or immature to mature. But there's a part where we start playing, and let's say you want what we want. Mm-hmm. You start playing, and you play an avatar of yourself at first. Okay, what would I do if I'm here? Or first, maybe you're just moving the character around. Bob does this, Bob does that, and you're like, okay, maybe I'll make decisions as if it was me there. And then you make this mental leap. If you like what we like, we're like, well, wait a minute. Terrence McSweeney's not me. He's got different motivations. Yes, I think somebody made a comment on your video, and my friend Disembowel will absolutely say this. Scott will say, listen, you're always playing you. Yes, a lot of my characters have elements of me in them because, can I play another human being flawlessly? No, I still have some of Ivan's perspectives in there. But,
you can only ever be you.
I can be me, but I can try to, as much as possible, get in the head of this other person with different motivations in this different time period. I'm also making a character that's appropriate for that genre, and this could be a really fuzzy, according to me, this can be a really fuzzy area. Am I making story decisions, or am I just making genre decisions? When I've made a character for playing Hollow Earth Expedition, which is very much like Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, I actually have been looking into that recently.
Oh, it's a hell of a game. It's a lot of fun. If we can play some Hex together. You make these characters that the decisions they're going to make, the personalities that they're going to have, should be appropriate for that genre. They're going to be they're going to make decisions a lot different, than somebody. If I'm playing a game where it's much more, Call of Cthulhu, But you start to, that's that you're role playing a human. That's an excellent look at. Okay, well, how do I get out of my own head and not play an avatar of myself and role play this other guy, you know. And when you're role playing NPCs as a game master, you go from the one personality fits all to like all of a sudden, well, wait a minute, you know, this you know, corporate head who just killed his daughter and doesn't want the Blade Runners to know, real life example. He's gonna behave a lot differently when I'm playing him than the maid of the woman that just got killed. It's really kind of simple, doesn't know what's going on. She just hopes to God she's not in trouble. And, you know, but she's simple enough to believe that the cops are holding her there because of paperwork rather than they're holding her there because they don't want her to leave and say anything because they don't want this thing to blow up in the news. You know, so you know, you start to be able to play these different NPCs differently because you start to get in their heads, you know, and that's, you know, so those videos are cool because they kind of start to usher in that idea, you know, so I think, you know, I like those videos. That's what I'm trying to say because they start to usher in that much bigger topic. I'm like, okay, that's what the neat thing about like Anthony's simulation series is even though it's not dated, it's just dated because he looks a lot younger and because his video making style has got a lot more polished. But you start to, if you go through that, you start to say, okay, these are all cool techniques to use if your goal is to have, you know, a reactive world that pushes back. And as a player, you're not making decisions for metagame reasons and all this kind of stuff. You know, how do we do that? You know, so it's cool stuff.
It is. Truden Fuzz made an interesting comment here. I would say without drama, you cannot have role play. Only simulating a realistic character without any stakes is just boring. Playing campfire scenes is for me not role play. It's both, right? It's both for me. Because if you're trying to simulate, and I get that this is a difference of opinion, and I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just saying that for me,
you won't. I tried.
For me, it's both, because, like Litfic, right? Not everything in life is exciting, right? But there is drama that takes place in life that makes it exciting. Another comment up here, again, Drudenfutz, is, let's see. Okay, right here. I mean, you kill the drama if you would have it scripted, and having a game mechanism to create drama is not what makes it scripted. I believe this is in reference to, I believe, if I'm wrong, correct me, Troll Babe, and how you decide how things happen in the scene before it happens. So I'm going to guess, right? I am not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I'm not a doctor of any stripe, but I think that there can be excitement in arranging the drama beforehand and then seeing how the dice change it, if it changes it at all, right? And the closer that you get to rolling the dice, the more exciting the activity of outlining those elements in a scene is going to seem. So that doesn't kill the drama. It's just a different type of excitement. And I think that's really what you're keying into, Drinfuss. Again, I am a doctor of no stripe. I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'm very comfortable being corrected. But that's what I think is happening there. So
I'm absolutely stirring the pot on this one, and don't answer this here now. But
before you stir the pot, I am going to ask that we maybe discontinue the conversation in chat about religions and veganism, and let's just maybe put that to the side. Thank you for your participation in the chat. So go ahead, stir the pot.
And you know, Anthony laughed at me when I said this. I said I'm going to ask him because you know, you look at Troll Babe. And he goes, okay, this is a story game.
Mm-hmm.
What's Burning Wheel?
Say that one more time.
Is Burning Wheel a role-playing game or not?
I'm not familiar with Burning Wheel.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I have actually been asked that question before. I don't know if it was by you or if it was by someone else in chat. Okay, yeah, I've been asked that question before, and I gave him the same answer. I don't know because I have no experience with it.
Oh, I might have asked it in chat, but that's one of those things like just back burner thing, you know.
Yeah, like I have every intention, and you know, I love to learn. I love to explore the different systems in role-playing games or, you know, purported role-playing games, or or even story games. Sometimes it's great just to know what a story game looks like, to be able to say, well, this is a story game, and here are the criteria that it meets in order to be called a story game. I enjoy doing that. And I do have every intention of going through Burning Wheel, but I have not yet done so. And there's some other stuff that I'm going through first.
Yeah.
But once I get to it, believe me, I will be reminded of this conversation.
It's not important. That's more me being a gadfly than anything productive. That's like the most unproductive question out there. But, you know, but Drudenfuss does bring an interesting look in there at that point, or ushers in an interesting thought like that. I kind of mentioned a few times is you start to be able to identify, like, you know, what Drudenfuss says was very like bold up front.
For sure. Bold, and I appreciate that.
Very bold up front. But you'll find, or at least it was my experience, I started to play with people. They would flat out tell me, dude, I am not about story as product. I'm not about intentional creation of a story. And then you start to play with them, and you start to see some decisions being made. And you start to realize that even though you think you're talking about the same stuff, you start to see that, like, my preferred way of playing, my preferred, philosophy, and they're different, and they start to diverge just a little bit. But then as time goes on, you start to, we have to talk to each other. Like, how can we make this satisfying for both of us? And so, pigeonholing people isn't the goal, but sometimes being able to identify, hey, you know what, we're almost here for the same purpose. We almost want the same thing, but it's something slightly different. And it doesn't have to just be between the story divide, but it's an easier one to like identify. Mm-hmm. Although I play with my friends, where all of a sudden I realized they were making things that were always about a game. It looked like we wanted the same sort of role-playing experience, but it was very much still a tactical exercise. And it didn't look tactical in the way that we're not interfacing with the mechanics or something like that, but everything was a game. Everything, and you start to go, oh man, that's why we're like butting heads every once in a while, is because they're seeing they're seeing the adversarial relationship, or the intentionally adversarial relationship, not the one you're talking about in one of your videos, but just not the world actually pushing back, but like, okay, there's
antagonistic,
a puzzle here.
not adversarial. Antagonistic. Yeah.
But there's a puzzle here. There's something I'm supposed to be figuring out. And you can watch this happen over and over again, and it's kind of like, ooh, it's helpful to see that, just in terms of being able to play together and not kill each other, or wonder why are they doing that? Because very often the differences aren't so obvious as Drudenfuss and I. Like, we couldn't play together; we'd kill each other. We can discuss games, but we have such different reasons for playing. But you start to see that I play with other people where there's that insertion of the object, and we'll pick on Max, and it's the piece of driftwood, right? Mm-hmm. And from, I don't know if you've watched his video about the piece of driftwood.
He has been getting hammered about this driftwood for the past 2 or 3 days.
I think a driftwood is a great example, because it really starts to you start to be able to see differences of intention. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really talk to him directly, but I asked some of his associates and friends some questions about, should you ask the game master how far apart these two buildings are, or if you just want to jump across the buildings, jump. If you're the game master, should you say, oh no, wait, these are too far, or should you just let them jump? And I got some of the answers. The driftwood's great. No, the bullets are flying. They just jump. This is, and I have other friends that say, listen, I shouldn't have to, don't asking, is this a piece of driftwood here, or this thing, is killing the momentum. It's killing the flow. Max, I believe, said, you can just pick up the piece of driftwood, because then you can get in to get to what you want to do with the piece of driftwood. At some point, I believe once the intention starts to be more and more about the flow, more to be about like, what did I want to do with the piece of driftwood in the first place? Just jump because we ought to be able to jump from building to building, because let's move the action forward. At some point, the decision-making process starts to be no longer in character, and let's move the story forward. And you're starting to make decisions with story as product. and that will piss a lot of people off. And I'm not saying it's bad.
I'm not so familiar that I can be able to comment one way or the other. I was only recently I say recently, this is literally yesterday, in like a 4D training session with Rick. And that should go up on, I believe he's putting it up on his channel sometime soon. So if you want to see me, attempt to role play in character, go for it. And so after the session, that did come to mind. But I think that this will fall under like the gradient, right? So what kind of experience do you want to create with the role play? And then what do you want to include to prop that role play up to achieve the experience you want? And so there's going to be give and take, and there's going to be things that you include. And as far as 4D goes, that seems to be what is at least currently considered to be best practice. I think that did I create anything? I don't think. Well, I guess technically I did create something. So we entered a tomb, me and an NPC. I say me, my character and an NPC. We entered a room, and well, I guess at the time it was me. I'm just gonna say me. Yeah, we entered the room, and I took a deep breath, and I said, I smell the must in the air, and I feel the dryness in the tomb. And I turned to my sickly mage NPC friend, and I asked him if he's going to be okay in the dry air because I know that he's sick. So I did create on the fly. It was more of a surrounding sort of a creation than a hard
conditions that should be there.
Right. But like, I mean, it could have been damp. It could have been like any number of other things. It could have been, stale air, or it could have been, you could have felt a wind passing through. Maybe there's another opening further down, but like, it could have been anything. And that's what I went with. And I think that, like I said, currently the best practice in 4D is to do that sort of thing. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick. And I can approach it like that. And, these are things that are definitely worth discussing. Like and Rick and I even had a conversation afterwards that, like, there are things that people are going to suggest that might ratchet up that level of immersion so that you can role play better. So that when I say role play better, I mean get in character better. You can occupy the headspace of that character more closely. And, there might be some disagreement on that, right? Like maybe someone is for some reason taken out of the moment when they are asked to sort of co-create like that.
All right. Well,
I can understand that, but like, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, that's the thing. That's why, my perspective is that ultimately, like, what's the goal? The goal is in character immersion. If you're us, if you're okay. So at some point, it's not that the set of procedures aren't the goal. It's like, well, how do I get there? For some people that might work awesomely, and very, like, let's just say that, like, speaking in character, it helps if everybody speaks in character. I play with some people that go back and forth. I prefer that everybody speak in character. There's that moment, and I will certainly, I'm in the bar, I'm going to pick up the thing that's there. There's that moment where I have to ask in or out of character, hopefully in character if I can do it, but like it doesn't kill me. Doesn't kill me to ask Anthony, geez, wait a minute, like how far apart of those buildings can I see? That doesn't kill me. That may drive somebody else nuts. Okay, but let's just talk about Ivan for a second. The switching cost for me is not very high. If I can figure out a way to ask it in character, I'm looking to see how far apart these buildings are, right? Before I commit to jumping, or I'm just like, now.
And that has a lot to do with like cue taking, right? So if I'm your GM and you say, you peer across the chasm, I peer across the chasm to, gauge I don't think you could probably leave off to gauge the distance, right? Well, so you lean forward, you peer across the chasm, you take a couple steps back, you walk toward, you size it up again. Like that's a cue for the GM to take to maybe in some way give you that information that doesn't,
right.
You have to avoid saying you, right? Like the GM is not your character. The GM has a whole damn world, and they have a billion NPCs that they could use. They don't need to control your character, and they shouldn't. But there's some sort of cue taking there that should be taking place to get at that. And so it's not intuitive. right?
Right. That's a
I
very
was doing it last night, and it's like, you know, you kind of, oh, well, do I act now, or do I do? What do I do? What do I say? How do I do it? And oh, here's a good point. You also have to consider the other people at the table. Asking a question out of character can not only break your immersion, but also those other players.
right. And
Completely agree.
that's the whole part of the discussion. Like, you know, that we have as a group, as a whole, talk to the players. Like, you know, I prefer that other people don't. However, the switching cost for me is not so high that it blows it for me. For other people, that might be the case.
Right.
I think where I was going, where I was going with it is like, you know, it depends. For me, it's vital to remain in character, to say I'm looking across to see how far apart they are, because I'm telegraphing to the game master specifically, this is my intention. Or I might even say, I look to see if it looks like I can jump across it, because then the game master is able, and to me that feels very, very in character. For somebody else that might not. But to me, it's like, you know, if I'm Ivan in the real world looking across these buildings, I'm not just looking across these buildings. I wonder how far apart these are. Academically, I'm not thinking in feet. I'm looking like, Jesus, can I freaking jump that? You know? And so I don't know what the hell like 17 feet looks like, but I'm gauging, oh, no way I can make that, dude. I'm going to die. You know, so I'm telegraphing to the game master my intention, which will inform the decision he gives back to me. To me, to Ivan, that feels very in character. That will not break my immersion at all. In fact, it's essential for it. If I create or narrate, I can make it across there, boom, I'm done. I am so out of character, it's over. If I have an idea for what, I'm sorry, Max, I'm going to pick on it. If I have an idea for what I want to do with this piece of driftwood, because it'll just keep the action going or whatever, and I narrate the existence of an appropriately sized piece of driftwood for what I want to do, I'm done. I'm out of character. It's over. That's not a defect. That's just like, dude, for me, I'm done. Blows it. You know, for somebody else, that might be great. But at that point, when I've inserted that appropriate sized piece of driftwood, I am now making decisions out of character for story reasons, or for narrative, dramatic, whatever it is, because you know, in order to do this next thing that I want to do as Ivan, I need this item here. I need that crowbar. And it's unfair to call the driftwood a crowbar, but I need this thing here because I want to get through the door, and I need a crowbar to get through that door. I have to look around. I'm looking for something that I can pry the door around with. That's, for me, it feels very in character. I'm looking for a piece of driftwood big enough that I think if I hit this guy over the head with, it'll knock him out.
Right.
You know, so I have to. What am I doing? I'm asking the game master a question without asking him a question. But if I insert, and it's just, once again, it's just for me, if I insert that appropriately sized piece of driftwood into the scene, I'm done. It's blown it for me. And at least for that moment, it feels out of character. Your mileage may vary.
Yeah, and it's gonna vary between, you know, person to person, and you know what it is that unfortunately drops their immersion. Max here says we also have to remember that those ideas or ideals are I'll start over. We also have to remember that those are ideals to strive for, not a heaven or hell, resurrection or damnation sort of thing. I agree with that completely. It's not. It's you know, a lot of times it's really just kind of attempting in the moment and then turning around after the game is concluded, taking a look and saying, oh, you know what? I could have done that better. I need to come up with ways that I could have done that better, right? So you're constantly striving for that ideal, and it will eventually, because that's part of engaging in a craft is honing the craft, right? And so being able to look at, you know, if you're a carpenter, you want to see how you make your joists. You want to see the angles that you're driving your screws, and you want to try to improve that as best as possible. You want to engage the best tools to be able to do that. And so, you know, in the moment, also you have, or typically will have a GM and an entire rest of a group that you can rely on to sort of aid you, right? So maybe it isn't the GM that takes your clue or that takes your cue. Maybe it's another one of the party members, and that begins the interaction. That begins, you know, the drama between the characters. It allows you to maybe shift your thinking just from one direct thing that you want to accomplish into, oh, maybe there's another way to do this. Let's talk about this in character with the other characters. And so I think that, you know, in a vacuum, saying how far apart are these buildings, I think it's definitely something that you have to consider. And in fact, I think the very first thing I asked Max about 40 role playing was when he was streaming with Crispy, and I believe there was another participant, but he was talking about how when he was first learning 40 role play, it was difficult to figure out like how much water is left in my canteen, like in my flask. Like how am I supposed to determine that without asking? And so I asked him, I was like, well, how do you do that? That was the very first question that I ever asked him about it. And he said, well, you pick it up off your belt and you swish it around a little bit and you take a bit of a swig, like a small swig to test it. You swish it around again. You kind of weigh it in your hand and you describe all that. And then you'll likely get some sort of an answer.
Yeah, you've just asked how far apart
GM. It's like it's asking the question without asking the question, but it's important to do that because like it's striving toward honing your craft in the way that you and I understand role play, and that's that's the goal to strive for. I think.
Here's well, it's not devil's advocate, and here's a big because I mean I don't want to pick on 40 or any other, like, I mean if a group has found a yes, I look for a piece of drift large enough to knock someone out, and that's precisely how I ask, because you're broadcasting your intention at that point. There's another real world example. Playing with a group of friends, and this is where we found out that one of our friends that was very so everything is a game, everything is a challenge. So he starts to ask questions of the game master. In terms of, I'm trying to like and he's actually describing actions. I'm going to see if I can attach, see if I can put a pole underneath this door. And I'm going to see now, I'm going to see like if I can shine enough light underneath that door, if I can see the shadow. What he's trying to do is put a freaking mirror under the door attached to his pole and shine a light on it so he can see what's in the other room. Now, what he did not want to do, and we had discussions about this afterwards, he did not want to broadcast his intention to the game master. That's what he's trying to do, because he was used to a very adversarial and antagonistic style of play where it was very much a game. Before the game master can figure out what I'm doing, I'm going to figure out a way to discover this thing. So he's asking all these questions without broadcasting his intention. And so what it ended up was the game master had no idea how to answer his questions after a while because he wasn't sure what the hell this guy's getting at. And
then that's a learned behavior.
It's a learned behavior, and it's one of those things where I've talked to people and mentioned the idea of broadcasting my intention, and gotten back the very vehement thing. Well, that's a time violation at this point. Just say what you're doing right now. If you're doing if you're giving your intention, that which is one of the reasons I maintain that a prescribed or set of behaviors or techniques that have to be rigidly adhered to, that's not the goal. The goal is I want to feel immersed as a character. What works for me and my group? It's going to be close because there's only so many different ways, so many ways to get to the same point. However, the details are probably going to be a little different.
Yeah,
and that depends on the switching costs. That depends on the group. So it's a danger you can fall into to say, okay, here's the way to, role play is the goal. Here's the way to role play. Oh yeah, because there's for one group adhering to all those procedures. Well, they're not going to work, and I'm going to, pretty much what I feel like at every moment is I'm not role playing. For somebody else, it might be like it's effortless as I don't know, chewing gum, or whatever's effortless. I'm not really sure what's effortless, but you know what I mean.
Breathing.
Yeah, breathe. Yeah, I guess breathing is pretty effortless.
Something like that. Yeah.
Until you start.
You
know what it is? That's actually not a bad analogy. Breathing is pretty effortless until you start thinking about it. You ever have that moment where you start thinking about your breathing, and then you can't. It's almost like not like you can't breathe, but like every breath you take, you're like thinking about taking it. And for me, depending on the set of procedures, if I'm doing that for a while, and that's probably a bad analogy because eventually you get good at it, but the thing is, you forget about doing those things,
Yeah, that's true. And I think that ultimately, again, is what the goal is. Like it's honing your craft, right? So you see the table. I've never played Pathfinder in any form. It would be difficult for me to not trip immersion at a table. The number of questions, like, yes, right? But if you are playing with a group of people whose end goal is immersion and they want to participate with you, and you are willing to learn and you're willing to hone your craft, I don't think it's a bad thing to have you come along and learn that, right? Like that you're gonna be able to observe other people acting in this same way around the table before you even need to ask a question. So maybe you can glean some of that information. Maybe you do have to ask that question, right? And that's going to depend on the group. It's going to depend on the social contract. If your social contract says no talking out of character at the table during session for any time, that's not the group to learn in, because they're going to completely ignore your out of character questions, but rightly, because you've agreed to that beforehand, right? So you have to find that, right? You have to find that initial game where someone's willing to, or a series of games where the individuals are willing to sort of be patient with you and take the time. And, you know, maybe it's a one-on-one session, right? Because you don't want to hold up. And that's what Rick did for me. He provided that one-on-one session so that I could begin to hone the craft and begin to learn, so that, you know, I'm being vetted. Essentially, they're vetting me to make sure that I'm able to stay in character, that I'm able to progress things. And, you know, there were a couple times where I slipped up and I didn't, you know, I wasn't necessarily describing what I was doing. Like I would try to go back and sort of revise what I was saying to be in the moment and be, you know, expressive in my immersion. But it's okay to have to ask questions to get understanding, right? It's just the goal, the ideal is what you're striving for.
And so it really depends, in my experience, on the group. Like there are a lot of things that, there's a lot of things that don't bug me, or I've come to accept because I'm playing with my friends. Like these are my friends, and there's certain things that they're probably never not going to do, and that's okay, because I'm past that, and I'm not talking about really egregious things, but I had moments like where I literally had to ask a guy who's I'm friends with, and we're playing Star Wars, and he's calling stormtroopers minion groups because that's what they were, and I finally said, dude, like, can you do me one favor? Just call them stormtroopers. Because every time you call them a minion group, I'm no longer hearing the music, as my friend Eloy would say. I'm not. I'm no longer Bob, like Bob. I forget what the guys with the 3 eyes. I'm no longer they're in danger from these stormtroopers. It's a minion group, and I'm thinking that way. So if you could just not do that, but Rick does. Your seat at the table does bring up a really good point, maybe inadvertently, is. There are, and that's one of the things that, like, I'm not defending the Forge, but that's one of the things they started doing was designing games where the system wouldn't fight your intention. So now, if you say your intention is to play in, as immersed in character as possible, there are games out there that will fight the hell out of you because there's so many procedures, there's so many things, and yes, Troll Babe will fight you because you have to get out of character. But there are other games that are so heavily tactical. And you have to check this thing. And I remember this one example, I from my early days playing Pathfinder, when I was more of like an OSR guy, and I would go on Dragon's Foot and rail against the modern D&D and all this other BS, back when I was, rigid and nasty and not a nice guy. But I wanted to push past somebody, we're involved in the combat. I'm trying to push past this guy to do something. And the Game Master says, do you have the improved bull rush feat?
Or you're in round, roll initiative.
I know it's like 5 foot step and blah, and I'm like, and what I've discovered with that particular game and with that group of people who are all nice people, right, is that not only did their intention fight mine, where they really weren't interested in role playing in character, it was more about the game, but the game fought me. And so part of what, love them or hate them, part of what the Forge tried to do is to design games that if you have a particular intention, and yes, they focused a lot on narrativism and a lot on, they actually were big time gamists too. They loved a lot of that crap. They designed games where like, here's the procedures and they're not going to fight you. The example you give about Troll Babe, which is, you're very smart. You figure out, all you got to do is have a 2 or a 9. And you always use magic or always use fighting. That's a problem unless your goal is to have dramatic situations. And I guarantee you there's people that intentionally created somebody with a 6 and then chose the wrong one because they wanted this to be dramatic. So that mechanic didn't matter so much. But in another game, if there are people that, I had the wrong build in Pathfinder. I don't want to pick on that game either, but I built a guy. I didn't realize the build kind of sucked. And so the character was not very effective. I didn't really care about that, except that
high intelligence fighter.
Yeah. But I didn't, actually see, I don't want to pick on that guy's video, but, I don't give a rat's ass about like high intelligence fighter. That to me doesn't matter. That can be just an interesting character. Not that I want to produce an interesting story, but it's just, but there, you will find, that's one of the reasons there's this holy trinity, as Same Old Jew, made up a long time ago. Our friend, Jean-Francois, play the right game, talk with the players, play the right game, be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. Part of it is like finding out there are some games that you're going to hate. Or, when I said I'd rather stick pins in my eyes and play Troll Dave, in my, it's tongue in cheek, but like very often for the most part, that doesn't do it for me, dude. Those games, or when we played the Veil, we had a good time playing the Veil. I'm like, that game's not doing it for me, because the system is mechanics and procedures, and those mechanics and procedures made me want to gouge my eyes out. So that I was just playing the wrong game. It was, and this is a very big digression. I know.
It's the wrong tool set to support the role play you are looking for. Yeah,
right. Or to support the experience for other people. It was awesome for them. That's precisely what they wanted, and they would be bored to tears with the experience I wanted.
Yeah.
So you start to find the games. There's games that are going to fight me, and games that aren't going to fight me, and probably some of the worst ones. Or the games that will fight you the most are the ones that give you really incoherent instructions, or the instructions that tell you to do two different things at the same time, or they promise an experience. This is like part of what Forge railed against as well, like things like the early World of Darkness games, where they promise this one experience, but then the mechanics absolutely throw at you, and your characters did not behave like that at all because they couldn't do a damn thing, or couldn't do what the box said.
Yeah. I imagine, and this is just sort of off the top of my head, off the cuff, I imagine that's because a lot of what was happening in World of Darkness is that they were very much designing toward a theme,
right,
or like a feel, instead of designing to support the role play experience that they wanted to.
Yeah. And I'm not an expert on that either. I mean, just
and again, just off the top of my head, maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? But
there got to be that point. Like I've talked to people that were really into it. With some of those games, you had to do so much legwork on the outside to make the experience be what you wanted it to be. It's like, dude, you should probably play a different game. And they're not that they're bad games, but like there are games that will fight your desired experience in various ways. Or there might be games that are they're not bad for people that want the in-character experience, but they're bad for you.
Yeah,
because the switching cost is so high to interface with those mechanics that it's difficult for you. Like I really love the narrative dice system for NDS Star Wars, but I'd much rather use it in a more loosey-goosey manner rather than looking at things on tables. And that's just me. Alien, on the other hand, when we played Free League's Alien, it was awesome because the table was very intuitive, and you started to realize, well, this table is a set of guidelines, and and then it felt very in character and very very smooth. But for other people, they hate it.
Take care of your seat at the table. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate you watching and commenting. I think generally speaking, it's been about hour and 45 minutes. I think we can probably wrap up here, because we will go on for hours and hours and hours, and I am going to owe you a live stream after this on your channel anyway, so we can just pick up right back there.
Right. And you could tell on that one, you have to just talk about how great I am the whole time.
You got it. Hey, your house, your rules, man. You got it. I'll come and talk about how awesome you are.
No, trust me, man. You can. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, nothing that we said here, nothing that I said, it's not gospel truth. It's just my perspective and my experience, and just things to consider, or roll around. But at the end of the day, you still have to walk away with your own experience and your own opinions, which is, I guess, part of my point in the first place.
Yeah, and I think we pretty well agree on that. And it's it's just a matter of selecting the correct tool for the experience that you're looking for. And if that experience is 4D, then It's going to be, you know, well, Shauna would tell you it's going to be a second generation RPG, period, full stop. And I don't disagree with him. I think that's a pretty solid base guideline to operate off of. But I think we're going to wrap it up here. I don't have an outro. I'm literally just going to click stop. The last time I tried to click stop, it did not work immediately. So
I will not do or say anything embarrassing or
thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I thank everyone who is going to watch it after the fact. I thank you, Ivan, for being willing to show up and have this conversation. I think it was absolutely fantastic. We both got some ideas out there.
And keep making videos, man. I enjoy them.
Oh, I will. I have a whole list. I have a whole list of stuff.
There is a very small. There's a lack of people on YouTube that have a thoughtful approach that are going to like say, you know, hey, I might be wrong, and are just like put some deep thought into stuff that aren't just telling, well, this is what you should do or whatever. It's like I'd much prefer the, you know, the approach.
I am happy to be wrong. I am happy to have my mind changed. I'm not going to speak to how easy that will be, but I am happy to. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I can admit that. All right. Thanks again, everyone. And thank you, Ivan. And we'll talk to you later. Have a good one.
Bye.